Hey, good morning, everybody. Went ahead and go ahead and get started on the Chapter 7 lecture of this JavaScript book of the JavaScript curriculum. Chapter 7, as you can see here, working with anchor links, right? So hyperlinks. So you're thinking the anchor tag, which is a very small part of this lecture. Working with images. Now, a lot of what we do in JavaScript, when you're working with like image carousels, again, I go back to, the common things that JavaScript is used for, and working with images is a big one. And so, working with images is not a ton of code, but it's an important concept. It's an important thing to grasp because it's done frequently. And since we work with images a lot in JavaScript, it's just, again, not technically that hard to do. It's really just a couple lines of code, but from a theory standpoint, like understanding it is important. And then working with timers. And so, we know that JavaScript is event driven. What that means is the web page loads and then the user interacts with the page, and depending on how the user interacts with the page, causes our JavaScript to run. They can click a button, they can hover an image. When the page loads, that's an event. When the page unloads, that's an event. I've said this before, but you can run JavaScript at pretty much any point in time or around any sort of occurrence happening, right? JavaScript is event driven. So, you can run JavaScript seemingly with any sort of interaction on the page. But what we haven't done, so we've run JavaScript on load, we've run JavaScript on click, we've run JavaScript on hover. You hover an image and run JavaScript. You hover an unordered list and run JavaScript, whatever. But what we haven't done is run JavaScript based on time. And so a lot of JavaScript runs based on time. For example, 3 seconds go by and the image rotates. You like an image, like an ad banner, a banner ad on the side of your page, and it just rotates images every 3 seconds. Think of the billboard when you're driving down the highway, and every 10 seconds it rotates an ad. Okay, you can do very simple ad bars like that using JavaScript. And so working with timers is just another way to run JavaScript based on time, not necessarily the user interacting with the page, just the page loads, some time goes by, and you run JavaScript. Okay, and so, objectives are pretty short here. Use JavaScript to cancel the default action of an event, and we'll get into that real quick. Preload images, so the bullet number 2, preload images for an application when the images aren't automatically loaded with the web page. And so that's the big concept when it comes to images, is this concept of preloading images. And what preloading images means, actually, I'll just save it for when we get there. We'll talk about what that means on the slide. And then the third bullet there, use interval timers in your applications. And so there's really two kind of timers. There's something called a timeout, and there's something called an interval. And a timeout versus an interval, again, we'll cover that once we get there. And so right now, let me think. You've probably seen this before. So right now in our HTML, you have a link, you click it, it goes to a page. It just goes there. You've probably sometime in your life, if you can think back to it, you've gone to a page and you've clicked a link and it gives you an option, you must be 18 or older to view this content. So are you of legal age to go to this site? And so you get like a little pop-up window. So you click a link, and instead of just navigating it right away, you get a pop-up. And so a link, if you're looking at slide 3 and you're looking at the A tag, the link has a default action. And that default action, of course, is to take you from one page to another page. But using JavaScript, you can cancel that default action and run some sort of JavaScript instead. Instead of having a link navigate you directly to the page, you could stop that behavior and then maybe ask them a question, get some sort of feedback, based on the information that they provide you. Maybe you can navigate them to a 18 and up web page, or 17 and down web page, right? So maybe you would change the destination of that link based on their age. And so these are all things, these are controls, like the input type of submit, that has a default behavior. If you think of the default input type of submit, the default behavior is to send the form information to the server for processing. And so in the form tag, there's an action attribute that has a script value. Anyways, you send the information to that script for processing. Input type of reset is going to reset the form to the default values. And the same thing, you have a button type of submit and a button type of reset. So these are 5 different HTML elements that have default actions that you might cancel. So what you do is when the submit button is clicked, you cancel the event, and then you run JavaScript instead, and then you use the JavaScript maybe to navigate to a different page or do whatever needs to be done. And so the easy way to do that, and I'll demonstrate this, right? Because I don't think this necessarily shows the whole thing, is this top function right here. And so if we have a submit button, or I'll do this with a link, we need to wire that link up to this event handler, and this event handler takes what's called a parameter. If you go back to when we learned functions, we did learn that inside of these parentheses goes what's called a parameter, and this is what's called an event object, and this can be different. This is just a variable, so the variable EVT is just the identifier. You could call it whatever you want as long as it's not a keyword. But this EVT, this event objects, has a method called prevent default, and that's how you stop the default behavior. And so I'll just kind of do a quick and easy demonstration. So page2.htm, click to navigate to page 2. So a simple link. And they said they use var, we use let. Event handler equals okay, so we can make our little page 2. Okay, so all we have here is a link to page 2. You click it, And welcome to page 2. Okay, so pretty simple link. Good question. So EVT, do you have to declare it? The way that variables are declared when they're parameters is you actually do not say let EVT. This variable is actually declared right here on line 12. So that's a good question, but it's like, well, if that's a variable, where did you declare that variable? Well, actually, it's being declared right here on line 12. The way that parameter variables are declared is without the keyword let or var. That's a good question. So let's go ahead and give myself an ID. Call this, just gonna call it page 2 link, whatever. So then we're going to target page 2 link. I use the $sign document, get element by ID. That's better. Yeah, Drew, that is correct. EVT is a variable that is being declared on line 15. So technically speaking, you do not have to declare it anywhere else. It is declared on line 15 right here where I'm highlighting it. Okay, so I've wired up an event handler for my link. Let me get that out of the way. Oh, got it. Cool. So all this is going to do now is prevent the default behavior. So instead of actually going to the page like its default, it's Monday morning. It probably won't work because it's Monday morning. Okay, it worked. 9 times out of 10, you're doing something on a Monday morning, it doesn't work. See, now I'm clicking. So I know the JavaScript is working because, well, the default behavior doesn't happen. So then what you could do is prompt So now we can give a little something like that. And we haven't necessarily learned to redirect. So we're going to, instead of just doing an alert, we'll do a redirect to, so this will take you to page2.htm. So now if they say they're of age, you can see we use JavaScript now to stop it. Okay, ask a question, and if they're of age, if they're 18 or older, it still takes them to page 2, which is again the 18 plus web page. Otherwise, we'll redirect them to minors.htm. Of course, we need to make this. So that'll say welcome to the page. So again, what we're doing is we're taking an item that has a default behavior, we're stopping it, we're running some JavaScript instead, and then based on what they enter, redirecting them to different pages. So you can do that. You can do that not only with links like I demonstrated, but you can do that with submit buttons and reset buttons, just the like. Doesn't matter if you're using the input tag or the button tag for your buttons. If you happen to be working with older browsers, they have some code here that's a little bit more backwards compatible with older browsers, but that's pretty significantly old. I don't even, like IE version 6, it's not even really something that I worry about much because, more modern browsers are all going to support this event object. Other words, if you're working with old IE, which does happen. It does happen where, in an ideal world, you would write code one way and it would always work. But in reality, we learn to write code one way and it just doesn't work in Internet Explorer. So more than likely, you'll come across scenarios where you'll have to write JavaScript, like here on slide 5, to be compatible with different versions of Internet Explorer. And if you kind of go through here, it says if you don't recognize the event object, then create an event variable and assign it to window.event. And then if you can recognize the prevent default method, then run prevent default. Otherwise, set the return value property to false. And so this is, again, this idea that you write JavaScript. Sometimes it's an important thing to do to support older and different browsers. In fact, talking with one of my alumni over the weekend, he was talking about how much time of his actual job is supporting, older browsers like IE. Yeah, Internet Explorer is now Edge. And Edge is a lot better. But what you find is that old computers have old browsers. And that's correct. Edge runs its rendering engine is the same as Chrome's. And so it's faster and more compliant with the standards. Yeah. But, you go to work for the government, for example, as I'm sure many of you know, the government is slow to change. And therefore you find older computers, and therefore you find older browsers and things of that nature. Okay, so that's preventing default behaviors with JavaScript. Next concept is working with images. And so, common task is in JavaScript is to have image galleries, image sliders, and there's all sorts of fun ones out there that specifically we will get into. We'll work a little bit with image galleries in this chapter, and you'll write some JavaScript. To be quite honest, to go through and write all the lines of code in just pure JavaScript for like a fancy image gallery, there's an easier way, which is jQuery. Okay, so we will work with images. But regardless of whether you're writing JavaScript or jQuery, this concept of preloading images is important. So here's the idea. Some images, and we go back to our HTML when we were learning about images on the web. We talked about having a good balance. And you're balancing, when you're working with images, you're balancing image quality. So you want high image quality, but typically what comes with high image quality is a large file size. Okay, so you want to create a balance between good quality and good file size, small file size. That's when I say good, I'm talking about small. Typically speaking, though, they kind of go hand in hand. High quality, high file size. You know, if you go down on the file size, you typically go down on the quality. And there are tools out there that we learned about that are built into like Photoshop and image editors that can help you find a good balance. So the file size is still pretty small, but the image quality can remain good. But, okay, so especially on a slow internet connection, anyone that lives in a remote area, rural area, maybe especially they have like satellite internet, because if you live out in the country, you probably don't have high-speed bandwidth, unfortunately still in 2020. I'm sure we all know someone who is unable to get high bandwidth connection because it's expensive to get it out there, to get it out into these rural areas. So some people still have, in the United States, some people still have slow internet connections. When you have slow internet connections, even medium file sizes take a while to download. So even if you have medium-sized images, they could still download slow in some cases. Also, in another case that we all deal with are our cell phones. Okay, and so sometimes, depending on where we are, our cell phone connections might not be that fast. And so when we're interacting with our JavaScript, the default behavior is to only load the image that's needed. And so your browser is only going to grab the first image and download the first image so that the user can see it. And the benefit of that is that if you've got an image slider, say with, and I'm just going to throw out the number 50 images in it. Okay, I'm just throwing that out there because it gets the point across. The benefit of just displaying the first image is that it doesn't have to download all 50 before the page is displayed to the end user. Okay, because that would just take forever, to download all 50 images, and the end user would think, oh, I guess my page isn't loading. Okay, they would perceive that as slow. Okay, so there's a benefit there. But what happens when, let's just say this is an image carousel, and you clicked on the arrow to load the next image? Well, then what happens is that the image has to download before the image could be displayed. And so that creates a lag in your web page performance when the user goes to interact with it. So it's a little bit of a balancing act here as well. And here's what you're balancing. You don't want your web page to load slowly, so you don't want to preload 50 images on page load. Okay, and if you preload 50 images on page load, then the user's going to say, well, this is taking forever to load, and they're going to be frustrated. All right. You also don't want your images to load necessarily when the user clicks a button, because then it's going to interact slowly. So I want you to imagine if we did preload our 50 images on page load, the page would load slow, but then when you would interact with the scrolling wheel, it would interact instantly because the images are already downloaded. Okay, so you could see that there's a balance there. What you want to do is you want to preload a few images so that as the user clicks next, the images are instantly there. They're there quickly, okay? And then maybe in the background, as a user is interacting with the page, you load a few more images that are kind of down the line a little bit. I think of like any of our feeds that we go to on social media nowadays. What happens? You scroll down on Facebook and it loads a little bit more. Then you scroll down some more and it loads a little bit more, right? And so what you have there is a balance. You get a lot of content up front, but then the page is continually loading content as you interact with the page, and it will continue to do that until you're not satisfied with the content anymore and you leave, right? That's essentially what you're looking for with these images. You want to preload some images so that the page interacts and you can just scroll through the images. But then as you start to scroll, you want to continue to load more images so that they're there and the page is responsive. Okay, so that's the theory behind images and preloading images. It's a balance. Okay, you don't preload all of your images. You preload some of them so that the page interacts smoothly. And then as you interact with the page more, you continue to load your images. So let's do this. Let's preload an image. And let me just show you how this works. So I'll just make a page called images, image demo.htm. Oh, by the way, we're going to take a screenshot of your work today for attendance. Preloading JavaScript images. I'm going to have an empty image tag. And what I'm just going to show you, we'll have a So the way to preload an image is with this syntax right here, how to create an image object. So what we're going to do is in the JavaScript, and this is our identifier. You could call this anything that you want. You know, you could say let point is you call this what you want, right? You want a good you want a good descriptive name. We've covered that before. Good descriptive names for our identifiers. Go ahead and make my event handler called okay, so when the page loads, and I could do this window on load. I could put this on a window on load, but what's going to happen is that this HTML is going to load top to bottom. When it hits this script tag, anything that's not in a function, it's just going to run, you know, sequentially top to bottom. So it's going to run line 13. It's going to load up this function. It's not going to run this function, but it says, hey, when you click on this button submit, then you're going to execute this function. So we're going to preload our image here. So this actually is the first step. And then how to load an image into an image object. So here we'll do main photo dot source, because it's an image object, equals, and because I just talked about which pizza do we want? That looks like good pepperoni pizza in there. Let's see. JPEG. I go into my repo, homework, JavaScript, chapter 7. Go ahead and make an images folder because that's a good idea. This is called pizza.jpg. So now we go back to my code. And put that in quotes. So you click the button, it's going to change out the photo. So image isn't going to be there. When the page loads, click the button. Let's see what I broke. And so let's see, I should be able to click the button. Let's put in a alert just to see that our function is running when you click the button. It is. The image is in a folder. Good morning, happy Monday. I'm a human making human mistakes. So if I go now into my, it says image source unknown. Interesting. Interesting. I tell you what, been going for 30 minutes. Good time for a break. I'll fix it by the time you get back. Let me pause the recording. Okay, so we did take a short break here, and I realized shortly into the break that I just hadn't finished writing the code. And so I'll walk you through the troubleshooting that I went through in my head. We got this empty image tag and a button, and then we hit the JavaScript, and these two lines of code load the image. So what this does is, as the page loads, it loads the image into the computer's memory. So it downloads the image from the server and puts it on your computer in the RAM so that it's ready to go and can be loaded instantly when we click this button. What we didn't do, and this is where I thought, well, we still have this image up here that's called main photo, and we never set the source of main photo. And where I confused myself is I gave the ID of this image called main photo, but then my JavaScript variable was also called main photo, and I thought, oh, that's not a good idea. So let me change, because these really aren't the same thing. This image object in our JavaScript is not the same thing as our image tag in our HTML. So I thought, I'm going to rename this image object to preloaded img. And so again, these two lines of code do the work of preloading the image, of downloading the image and having it ready to go in RAM. And now I thought, okay, so this helped me because now I see that I have the preloaded image ready to go, but I didn't have any JavaScript that set the source of this image to be the preloaded image, right? Main photo, I don't have anything down here dealing with main photo. That's when I realized, well, wait a minute, I got to set the main photo's source to be my preloaded image. So here's my preloaded image object. So I just realized, well, all I got left to do is document get element by ID. And we learned about this last chapter, how you can target main photo. And with the HTML specification, we could just set the source of the main photo like that equal to our preloaded image source. And then so that's the only line that I had left. Where I confused myself is by having the identifier be the same name as the ID in the HTML. That's what got my brain crossed. And what uncrossed it was by naming them different things, I pretty quickly realized that this main photo source was never set. And so now when I run this, you click load image, and you can see it's instantaneous, right? You click it and it's there right away. Okay, so that's the theory behind preloaded images. This is the practice on how to do it. Step one is to preload an image. And again, what is preloading? Preloading an image is the act of downloading the image from the server to the client to be ready to use instantly in your script. Okay. The opposite of a preloaded image is when the script downloads the images as they are needed, and you note which might cause a lag in your page performance. Preloading images can cause a lag in the page load. So again, it's a balance. Do you want the page lagging on load, or do you want the page lagging on as you're interacting with it? You probably want, ideally you want to balance it out to have a little bit of both. One question came in here. If you have multiple images, can you preload code in conjunction with arrays? And that is correct. In fact, when you look at what you're going to do in the book, that's exactly what they do. And so if I take a look at this, and now this is a little bit more intense than the code that I just wrote. But if we remember, so what do we have here? So this is like an image gallery that you click on the image and it pops up down here. Okay, and what they do, and you really you kind of take a minute and study this, and I've seen it before, that's why I can just know off the top of my head. What this particular demonstration is thumbnails. And so if you remember thumbnails are small images that when you click on them, it opens up the big image. And so you have a bunch of image links. All of these small thumbnail images are image links. And if you remember image links, it's exactly what it sounds like. An image link is an anchor tag, and inside of the anchor tag you have an image tag. Okay, and so what the small images are, like this would be the small image 1, and then when you click on the link, it's going to open up the large image 1 JPEG. Okay, and it's going to open up this large image instead of like opening up in a separate page, which when we did these image links in our HTML, the large image literally opened up in a separate page. Okay, you're going to have to go back to your HTML days and think about, you know, what we saw was a small image. When you clicked on the small image, it navigated to its own individual page and you would see the large image. Okay, now instead of navigating to a separate page, we're going to use JavaScript to have the large image show on the same page. And so you could just click through these different images and swap out the big image. Okay, and the way that's done is they get elements by tag name. They get all of them in all the anchor tags and store them in an array called links. So links is an array, and we remember from last chapter that get elements by tag name returns an array of anchor tags. So links is an array of anchor tags, and then through this loop, we're going to set the image source, each time through the loop, we preload a new image. So that's what this line does. And then set that image's source to the link sub-0, the first link on the page, href. So the image.source is equal to the link sub-zeros dot href, the first link on the page. So you see var link equals link sub I. So the first time through the loop, that's link sub-0. So the first image source, the first preloaded image's source is set to the first link's href. Well, the first link's href is in a large image. So the first preloaded image is going to be the href attribute of the first link. And so this little code right here preloads 4 images using a loop and using arrays. Okay, so the code in the book is much more complex. That's why I wanted to kind of start with a more simplified preloaded, because again, right away the book introduces arrays to do this and loops, and again I know and also get elements by tag name, which we learned in the last chapter. Okay, what I will have you guys do is at the end of this, I want you to code this demonstration for practice, more or less, not for a grade. So here's a little bit of that code. Okay. So you guys will come back to this, doing this image swap application. It'll be a good thing to practice. Okay. There's really not a ton here as far as new material. Working with links, check. Working with images, check. And working with timers. So we're kind of on the third piece of the lecture here. Timers, again, I kind of introduced them earlier. The idea is that you're running code either one time after a certain amount of time has gone by, or multiple times. And so when you have a timeout is how you run JavaScript code one time, a single interval, if you will, based on some time. And so let's demonstrate a timer. Class name, there it is, class name. So we're going to add a class name of red. So this function targets the ID of red and adds a class name of red. And so if we do this, let's just, as of right now, we would probably do this on like a button click is probably what we would typically do. And so this is what we know how to do so far. And so probably a window on load. We're going to target the button and set the on click to change color. Okay, let's find the error. It automatically did it on load. One second here, my boss. Okay, yeah, pause that real quick, but I'm back. Yeah, the reason why the text is red is because I already had the class on it. So let's take the class off, right? So that now when we run the function, it adds the class name of red. And now when you load the page, we don't have it red, we change color and it goes red. Okay, now instead of doing that on click, we're going to do this on a timer. So what we'll do is we'll click and we'll start a timer is what we're going to do. And so instead of running this code here, we're going to start our timer. So if we look at the function, it's called set timeout. Set timeout with a function and a timer. So the delay time is how long to delay this from running. So instead of window on load, we'll do on click, we'll do set timeout, set. And you do this in milliseconds, so like 5,000 milliseconds is 5 seconds. So now what we do is we say call the change color function after 5 seconds. And so that's just going to call it one time. All right, so here we go. So oh, it didn't even wait for me to click. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it executed. So instead of putting that here, I'm going to keep that the same because I want to do this on click. So I demonstrated the timer, which was the point of the example. But what happens is the timer started running on load. And that's not what I wanted. I wanted the timer to start running when we did the click. And so in order to do that, we're going to call our set timer here, set timeout. And what we'll put in here is what's called an anonymous function, so we don't have to do a function call. Let's see. One, two, three, four. There it goes. So now it waits for my click to do the timer. So obviously if I'm not clicking, it should not go red. So demonstrated it's not going red, even though that's not really part. It's to get a timer to run on an event versus on page load. So that worked. And we've done anonymous functions. Like this right here is called an anonymous function. Actually right here is called an anonymous function. Instead of making another function and then calling that function, we just say run this line of code. And don't give it a name. Don't give that function a name and run it after 5 seconds. So that's set timeout. The idea behind set timeout, as I've demonstrated, is that it just runs a single time versus the other method that we have is a interval. And so if I jump ahead a little bit, and I'll talk about this clear timeout. So it's, just in the names, if you pay attention to the names, you'll notice a difference, right? A timeout is a single time of running a piece of code. An interval is many times. And so interval says run this chunk of code every 10 seconds or every 5 seconds. And so it runs it many times. And then clear interval is how to stop your interval, and obviously clear timeout is how to stop the timer. The idea being is that if I started this timeout and said, you got in 5 seconds, run this line of code, I could cancel that. I could say, don't run this, after 5 seconds, and that would stop my timeout. Same thing with my interval, is run this chunk of code continually over and over and over again until I clear it. And so let me do another small example of an interval. Yeah, that's one scenario. So you have an image carousel that's continually scrolling until you click pause, and then you stop the image carousel from scrolling every 2 seconds or whatever it may be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set an interval here, and so I'm going to target my paragraph, which I have named as red. First child node value equals so we set a counter to 1, and we set the paragraph's text to be counter plus plus, and that will every 3 seconds run this code when I click the button. And so maybe more complex than it needs to be. Let's see what breaks. So not doing anything. Obviously we're not changing colors anymore, but I click the button. And cannot set node value of null. So red is my paragraph. And we'll do enter HTML instead. See if we get the same error. There it goes. So now you'll notice every 3 seconds, 3,000 milliseconds, our counter goes up. And so we are running this line of code every 3 seconds. Now, what I'll do is I'll do start counter, because that's really what this is anymore. Yes, if I did counter minus minus, it would decrement and go 0 or 1 0 negative 1, so on and so forth. There we go. What I want to do now is show you how to cancel this. So we've got this interval that's running. And so I'm going to make a variable called stopper, for lack of a better term. And we're going to set stopper equal to this function call. I'll make another function called stop count. And then what you do is you do clear interval and then pass that stopper variable. And so this clear interval, and inside of it you pass this, this variable. clear interval method and you pass it a variable that you assign equal to the set interval, and I declared it on line 19, I assigned it on line 24, and then I clear it on line 32. So that's what clear interval is. It'll be used to stop the count. And the reason I didn't declare this, I'll let this count down for a little bit. The reason I didn't declare this on line 24, I declared it on line 19, is so that I could use it inside of this other function on line 32. What I haven't done is created a stop counter. Yeah, great question. How do you actually get it to stop? So we're going to make an input type of button. Value is stop counter. btn stop. It's a problem with live demonstrations. You see that I'm a human and I make silly mistakes. But the important thing is you get them fixed. Document, get element by ID, btn button, stop. On click, we're going to call stop count. So here we click this button, it calls this function clears the interval. So let's start it. It doesn't matter where we stop it, we'll stop it at 3. All right, stop counter. We can wait and you can see that it does in fact stop the interval from running. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you wanted to make it stop based on the value that's there, you know, you could read the value into a variable. You would read the value into a variable and you would say if the variable's value is equal to -5, then you stop. So you could stop it on all sorts of ways. So let me go back to the code here. Question is, the variable stopper is declared when you put it inside of clear interval. So technically, if we break this down, we're declaring a variable to use to clear our intervals. So we declared on line 21. And then on line 26, this is where we assign the variable to a set interval function that will be cleared. And then here, use the variable to stop the interval from running. Yeah, and you know, here we've got our counter value. So maybe instead of doing a button click, we'll say if counter is -2, that way we don't even need to do the button click. If counter is -2, start counter. I lied. It stopped. It kept going. If counter counter equals counter -1. We'll actually reassign it here. And then here, instead of decrementing there, we'll do counter here. There we go. That way we're actually reassigning it each time. Oh, I'm breaking it all good now. Let's see. Oh, we got to put this counter equals counter minus 1 inside of our interval. There we go. That way it runs multiple times. I was just doing it on the button click the one time. Now we're changing counter every time. And we're going to put our if statement inside of the this is getting dicey. Just when I expected it not to work, it worked. That's how it goes. It's good to experiment with this stuff though, because these are things I haven't tried with these timers. Did various things. I've worked with these timers in the past, but not in these chunks of code, if you will. So that's timers. That's intervals. That's clearing your timers. That's clearing your intervals. Okay. That is going to be the end of the lecture. That's all the new theory that I have in this chapter. I'm going to stop the recording.